Good morning. My name is Dean Godson, Director of Policy Exchange. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to this keynote address by Douglas Ross MP, leader of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, addressing the vital and topical theme of why our union is special. It's a great pleasure to be able to welcome here to London for his first speech as leader of the Scottish and Conservative and Unionist Party. It couldn't be more timely, supremely well qualified to pronounce on these matters from a Conservative and Unionist perspective as MP for Murray since 2017, prior to that as an MSP, and prior to that as a councillor. Also may have two other particular distinctions amongst political leaders in these islands. First of all as a dairyman, and then subsequently as a dairy farmer, the only leader in these islands, political leader in these islands, who can distinguish Galloway from a Piedmontese at the distance of 100 meters, and also as an assistant and special referee, as the only political leader in these islands to have run around on the pitch with such eminenti as Lionel Messi. So a particular pleasure to be able to welcome you here today. Douglas will be delivering your keynote address, and then we'll be going open to questions, usual Policy Exchange House rules on the questions. No question too outrageous. You just have to state your name and organisation first. So thank you, Douglas. Look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Dean, for that introduction. In my speech to the Conservative Conference last month, I said the case for separation is being made more effectively in London than it ever could in Edinburgh. And of course, I knew when I made that statement it would be seen by some as provocative. But I also said it because it reflected a growing frustration in Scottish unionism. Frustration at how actions taken by the UK government in London have affected views in Scotland towards our union. Now, there has been much discussion lately about the need to strengthen the union. I've heard lots of views on the need for union policy or a union agenda, but I have not heard a consensus on what those are or what strengthening the union actually means. That's why I've taken the opportunity to make this speech at Policy Exchange today. Having identified a problem last month, I now want to offer a solution, to set out my own view on how the UK government can successfully rebuild support for our union in Scotland, and the challenge that they face in doing so. Now, I must start by noting that we're discussing our union just as we're on the cusp of forging a new relationship with another union, the European Union. There can be no doubt that Brexit will change the relationships between Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England. On a practical level, leaving the EU has meant a reallocation of powers previously legislated for in Brussels. They're now going to be exercised in Holyrood, Cardiff Bay, Stormont, and yes, in Westminster, in a way that could never have been envisioned by the architects of devolution, and the settlements were not originally designed for. Powers in areas such as environmental regulation, animal welfare, and public procurement. The majority of these are being transferred directly and will make our devolved legislators among the most powerful of any type anywhere in the world. But the EU is not just a trading bloc. It has an interest in a whole range of areas relating to economic development, management of natural resources and culture. Sectors of our economy and communities across our country have benefited from EU funding programmes over 47 years of membership. And those programmes straddle areas of devolved and reserved responsibility. They are not constrained by our devolution settlement. Those funds will now have to be replaced by the UK government and the devolved administrations. Working together, they will ensure that communities and people receive the support they deserve. But more importantly, on an emotional level, leaving one union has changed how some people view our own union. Those people who voted for Scotland to remain in the UK in 2014, but also in the EU less than 2 years later. Now that we're leaving the latter, they're now questioning their decision to support staying in the former. Our opponents say this result has invalidated the 2014 referendum, On a practical level, we could answer this by simple democratic mandates. In the 2014 independence referendum, 55% of voters were against leaving the United Kingdom. And in the 2016 EU referendum, 52% of voters were in favour of leaving the European Union. In a democracy, we respect the outcomes of both referendums. Then there are economic arguments. The rest of the UK is a destination for 60% of Scottish exports, supporting over 500,000 jobs. In comparison, the EU is a recipient of only 19% of our trade. The UK is also worth 10 billion in additional public spending in Scotland, while Scotland is a net contributor to the EU. Yet these practical arguments do not address the emotional disconnect that a person in Edinburgh who voted no and Remain felt when they saw the celebrations in London on the 31st of January, or the frustration that they feel when the UK government continues to prepare for no deal while seeking to deliver a new partnership with the EU. Instead of taking pride in the decision they made in 2014, there are people who have begun to question it. They ask, why is our union different? The UK is a partnership of nations, just like the European Union. Scotland is a European country like those across the North and Irish Seas. We are going to face years of uncertainty, whether we are part of the UK or an independent country. Why is our union special? And why should I continue to support it, is their question. There are many countries and international organisations that are officially unions. The European Union has continental counterparts in Africa and South America. Across the Atlantic, the constitution of our American friends refers to the United States as a union. And it would be remiss of me today not to pause and note that we are just one day away from the US presidential election. I hope we can all look forward to a fresh approach. Yet when they are talking about a union, it is clear they are referring to an institution, be it a state or trade bloc. Whereas here, we do not just use the term union to refer to the state that was created by union, the United Kingdom, but also the important ties which hold our country together. Because our union is not just one single relationship. Yes, there was the Act of the Union in 1707 that brought Scotland and England together and created the United Kingdom. But before that event, there was already a tight web of connections tying together our four nations. And that web of connections is deeper today than it's ever been. It brings together not just nations, but communities and people. 23,000 students from the rest of the United Kingdom are enrolled in Scottish universities. Lincolnshire farmers supply barley that produces Speyside whisky in my Murray constituency. And the most popular children's book series in the world was written by an English woman in an Edinburgh cafe. The political institution is underpinned by social and economic ties that affect every aspect of our lives. Our union even exists in our own families. My grandfather, Geordie Sorry, was one of 9 boys brought up in a small tin-roofed 2-bedroom croft in Monimusk, Aberdeenshire. One of his brothers, Jimmy, moved to Corby originally to work in the steelworks and then with Golden Wonder. Our family kept close links with Jimmy and his wife Evie and their family, as well as our cousin Mervyn and his family in Northern Ireland. Maybe after Saturday's rugby scored, it's best that today's anecdote doesn't include an example that extends to Wales, but just like families, our union has created a common history, culture and identity that is shared across our 4 nations. At the same time, while it has shared values, our union also has an openness and inclusivity. It allows us to continue to express our national differences while being part of a greater whole. Now, I do not believe that the most passionate of nationalists could credibly argue that being part of the UK makes us less Scottish. Our unionism is flexible enough that it can accommodate multiple national identities. It celebrates our differences and cherishes inclusion over uniformity. Contrast this with nationalism. It defines identity as singular, as if it's a commodity that only one can have. By its very nature, it's narrow and divisive. It requires another to exist, someone who can never be part of the group. The SNP is no exception to this. Nicola Sturgeon has done a good job of papering over this for appearance's sake, but the view of many in the SNP is no different from nationalist movements we see in other countries. They see nothing wrong with blacklisting a shop because of the way the owner votes, or boycotting a product because it has a union flag on it. Over the summer, we were reminded of this again when people crossing the border for work and travel were shouted at to go back to England. And in the middle of a global pandemic, when thousands of Scots have lost their lives and tens of thousands of jobs are at risk, there are many SNP councillors, MSPs and MPs who believe that preparing for an independence referendum now is a good use of their government's time, who show more interest in the latest poll numbers than the latest R number. Instead of trying to bring people together in a time of crisis, they are frothing at the mouth over what they see as their golden opportunity to push independence. I truly believe that given the choice between a divisive and narrow nationalism and an inclusive and open unionism, our no Remain voter from Edinburgh would choose the union every time. And it is that attitude that has allowed our union in the United Kingdom to endure. It has the weight of history and of social as well as economic and political partnership that the EU lacks, but recognises our national diversity, our union of peoples, in a way that could never exist in the United States. Our union is special because it respects our right to have multiple identities while still building a deep and strong partnership. We do not have to choose between being Scottish and being British, we can be both. This extends to how we govern our country. Scotland has two governments, and in contrast to international comparisons, there's no rigid hierarchy between the different tiers of government. They both have areas of responsibility and management. They both have a role. The decisions made in both the Scottish Parliament and Westminster affect the way that we live our lives. And people look to both their MPs and MSPs to resolve their issues. This political devolution is still relatively recent invention, though its administrative roots run deep. But its very existence shows the inclusivity and adaptability of our union. That we were able to find an answer to the calls in the 1980s and 90s for more distinction in how Scotland was governed. And that we could change the way that the United Kingdom operated to accommodate those wishes, while retaining all the benefits of our union for all of our people. To the effect that we don't have to choose between governance from Edinburgh or London, we have both. In contrast, our departure from the EU was driven by its inability to shift away from ever closer union, to adapt and change to our needs. In February 2016, when David Cameron asked the EU for a special status, he received very little. So the flexibility of our union is also part of what makes it special. That willingness to adapt, to have diverse and changing government structures across its 4 nations is increasingly within those nations. While still ensuring that every community across the UK shares equally in the benefits of the union is surely one of its great strengths. But if our union is to endure, then it must continue to be special. It must play to its strengths by remaining open, inclusive, and able to adapt to the times. As I said earlier, there is a lot of debate and discussion right now about how we strengthen the union. It's an easy soundbite inserted into many speeches and comments, yet there is not a shared understanding of what it means. There are those who see devolution as a massive strategic error, as a Pandora's box that once opened was a process, not an event, not towards a stable settlement, but towards independence. One that has given the SNP a platform from which it has the resources and exposure to destroy the British state. And therefore, the only way to strengthen the union is to abolish the Scottish Parliament and return to a pre-1999 situation or severely constrain its powers. I say to them, firstly, we live in a reality where devolution enjoys widespread public support. And secondly, our problems lie not with the machinery of devolution, but with the SNP government that is controlling them. And they will not vanish with the removal of the Scottish Parliament. So I say to those people to keep their eye on the prize of defeating the SNP rather than attacking a settlement that the Scottish people support. We will not strengthen the union by turning back the clock. We will only strengthen support for independence. And my party will not win by putting itself on the wrong side of that argument again. On the other hand, there are also those who see the answer as in strengthening the Union in another round of devolution. One more Scotland Act to join those of 1999, 2012 and 2016. Devolution in 1999 was an effective response to support for Home Rule, and in the 2010s for its expansion. It was not designed to be an effective response to Scottish independence. My concern would be that another transfer of power, like those we've seen previously, would not shift the dial in any meaningful way, while it may endanger the enduring principle that all parts of the Union share equally in its benefits regardless of where they live. So more devolution is still not going to be an effective response to independence. As I said, our Union's strength is in its adaptability, in being able to deliver imaginative responses to the challenges that it faces. I believe that imaginative response exists if the UK government has the will to lead rather than reacting to events. Brexit has brought with it many challenges, such as replacing EU funding schemes, legislating in areas of former EU regulation, and the end of freedom of movement. The black and white approach of our devolution settlement no longer looks adequate. The UK government needs to seize the opportunity to create a more tangible role for itself in delivering previous EU funding schemes. Yet the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, for example, remains just a name and little more. We need to see an approach taken that allows a UK-wide programme of investment in communities, but that does not replicate or take away funding from what the devolved administrations are already delivering. On the other hand, the UK government needs to do more to involve devolved administrations in delivering our new international role. They'll have to implement trade deals, so should have a role in producing their terms. And with the end of freedom of movement, we will need to see more flexibility in our immigration system to account for the needs in different parts of the country, which the devolved administrations are well placed to represent. Key to this will be a restatement of the Respect agenda in engagement and communication. Our devolution settlement was conceived by a Labour Party that arrogantly presumed that they would remain in power in all parts of the UK. It was designed with informal resolution rather than open political disagreement in mind. The COVID-19 crisis has put the structures for interaction between the UK government, devolved administrations, and indeed English minorities to the ultimate test. And I think that even the most committed defender of the current system would admit that they've been found wanting. On one hand, the UK government's suspicions around security of information has been legitimate. But on the other hand, devolved administrations responsible for managing the virus in their nations have been forced to look for detail on announcements from publicly available press releases. Trust has broken down, and when it does, we see time and time again that popular opinion sides with their devolved representatives. The SNP benefits from intergovernmental disputes, the UK government does not. The solution lies in a formal framework for interaction, with rules underpinning the flow of information and regular engagement, supported by a clear arbitration process to manage dispute and disagreement. This will not just reduce the opportunities for nationalists to claim a constitutional crisis, but encourage more collaboration and working together. That's what Scottish people want to see from their governments. It's also time that we delivered a voice for devolved administrations and English mayors at Westminster. It's ridiculous that the Church of England and the hereditary peers are better represented in the UK legislative process than the Scottish Government. Many governments have flirted with Lords reform, but when we finally get round to it, we need to deliver formal representation for our nations and regions. Now, these suggestions are in no way the totality of what the UK government could do, but they do show how our union can evolve to meet the current challenges, how it can encourage the collaboration that the Scottish people want to see between their governments, while continuing to ensure that all parts of the country share equally in its benefits. Ultimately, though, we're not going to rebuild popular support for our union just with constitutional change. While our union is special because it is flexible, it is also so because it is underpinned by common values shared across our nations. Brexit has been damaging to support for the UK because it undermined, in the eyes of many, those shared values. We failed to bring our country back together again after the vote. Leave and Remain parts still feel divided more than 4 years on from the decision. For many, the 31st of January represented a triumph, but for others, all they felt was regret. We didn't build a consensus around delivering Brexit. Instead, there's been a winner-takes-all approach. And that has alienated former Remain voters who still feel aggrieved at the referendum result. In Scotland, the outlet for that anger and frustration is the SNP. It is not just the benefits of separation that are driving support. It's not the benefits of separation that is driving support for independence, but instead a perception that Scotland and England no longer share common values. The Prime Minister said after last year's general election that we need to let the healing begin. And I agree that. Healing is what we need right now. We need to reunite our country around a new consensus, re-establish our shared values and move our country on from the division of the EU referendum and the process of Brexit. Because I truly believe that's what the vast majority of people in our country want to do. Come together and move on. That is always going to be difficult in a pandemic that has seen a differential approach across our country between and within nations. But if this terrible virus has shown us anything, it is that time is too precious to continue fighting the same arguments for years to come. Instead, we need to unite our country around the values of openness and inclusion that have always defined our union. That is the single most important thing the UK government can do to strengthen it. Yes, we need to see more visible UK government in Scotland and for it to be more defined, mature relationship with the Scottish government. But our union is greater than the governmental ties between nations. It is a union of communities and of people, and those ties need to be reinforced by shared values that the UK government needs to promote. So even more important than union policies, we need to see factoring in holding our open and inclusive union into everything the government does, to re-emphasise the shared values that exist across our four nations. These shared values were clear when Rishi Sunak delivered the furlough scheme that protected millions of jobs in every part of the UK. The furlough scheme has not just been a lifeline to people who would have otherwise lost their jobs, it's also a real and tangible reminder of the economic security of the union. It shows exactly how boldly we can act as a United Kingdom. Now that the scheme has been extended to cover the impact of a second lockdown in England, how could a unionist government not restart the scheme if a second lockdown is required in Scotland? It cannot be that furlough is not affordable when Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland or parts of Northern England need to go into a lockdown, but when all of England goes into a lockdown, the taps are turned on. So this has to be cleared up and cleared up now. Commit to extending furlough if Scotland needs to go into lockdown. We all hope that by following guidance and doing the right thing, a second Scottish lockdown will not be necessary. But if it is, the UK government must treat Scotland and England the same. Last month, I said that independence was not inevitable. I truly believe that is the case. The bonds that we share across our four nations and between the people and communities that make up our country are deeper and more essential now than they have ever been. But you can't ignore the way that Brexit and how it's been delivered has undermined the perception that there are common shared values that unite us. We can continue to talk in facts about the economic importance of the UK or the democratic mandate which meant that we had to leave the EU, and about practical changes to the way that we govern our country to empower devolved administrations and increase the visibility of the UK government. These are important, but the key driving force behind the independence movement right now is the perception that our values are no longer shared. After the Brexit process and the handling of the pandemic, they no longer see our union as underpinned by shared values as special. And the challenge to this UK government is if it is serious about strengthening our union, then it must bring our country together. Let the healing begin. Do not govern solely for the majority, but for everyone across our four nations. That's not a signal that my speech has gone on too long. That is the weekly fire alarm drill, I believe. But make restarting our shared union values of openness and inclusion a part of everything the government does. And if we do that, then I believe that we will see support for independence fall. We will make that Edinburgh voter proud again of the decision that they took in 2014. Because independence remains as unattractive a proposal as it has ever been. The Scottish people don't want to have to go through another divisive referendum right now. They don't want to give up sterling for the euro or another unidentified currency. And they don't want a border at Berwick separating trade and families. So if we want to strengthen our union, then we need to restate and rebuild our shared values. We need to show why our union is special. So let us unite this country, Scotland, Wales, England and Northern Ireland, leavers and remainers, around our shared union values, and move forward together from division. Thank you very much.
Please, sit down. Thank you very much. Thank you for your keynote address. So as I say, we're going to now have a Q&A. No question too outrageous. You just have to state your name and organisation first. If I can urge as many of you as possible to stick up your virtual hands. I know that there will be many people seeking to ask a lot of questions of our guest of honour today. I see there's a question from Colin. If you could please state your surname and organisation. Colin, I see, has asked to ask a question. Michael has asked a question. Michael B, but I can't see.
Blackley.
Yeah. Michael, coming in.
Hello, hi.
If you state your name and organisation, please, full name.
Yeah, so it's Michael Blackley at the Daily Mail. And I'd just like to ask on some of the comments that you made on furlough, Douglas. What discussions have you had with UK government cabinet ministers on this? And what indication have you had on whether they're going to move on this and give a guarantee that they'll provide furlough payments in Scotland if there's another lockdown?
Thanks, Michael. I had discussions very soon after the Prime Minister's announcement on Saturday evening with several members of the Cabinet. I made my feelings known then that I thought we should get out in front of this. We should make that commitment at the same time as it had been given to England. It was right that the Chancellor announced the reintroduction of the furlough scheme and that it would be available to all parts of the UK for the period that it is being delivered in England, but we have to go further. We simply cannot have a situation where there has to be a request for Scotland or other parts of the UK to have the furlough scheme. So I continue to have discussions with the Treasury and other departments. I'm hopeful that we will get the right outcome with this, but I also think it was right to take the stand I did because it's important for Scottish businesses and Scottish jobs that they get the support from the furlough scheme, the support that's been there throughout this pandemic. And as I said in my speech, Michael, I really hope we don't need this in Scotland. I hope the way that we've responded as a country to the restrictions that have been put in place means we don't need to go into a national lockdown again. But if that is required, the support from Rishi Sunak, the Treasury and the UK government has been vital in the last 7 months of this pandemic, and it will be vital again should we need to use those tools if we have to go into another lockdown.
Thank you. Colin, are you coming in? No voice? Well, I think we'll take the next one.
Can you hear me now, Dean?
Yes, please. Name and full name and organisation.
Absolutely.
Please.
Colin Mackay from STV here. Sorry, I lost the connection earlier on. Douglas, you say that you've made your feelings known, but you've clearly had no commitment from either the Treasury or the Prime Minister on a future furlough for Scotland. But you also say that you want to see all parts of the UK share equally in the Union. Do you think the furlough decision on Saturday night, not taking into account other parts of the UK, make it look less than equal?
Well, let's be clear, Colin. The furlough announcement on Saturday night did include other parts of the UK because it has been made available to those in Wales and Northern Ireland, which is currently in lockdown. What I'm saying is it should be available regardless of when that tool may be required in Scotland, because we could utilise it right now. As I say, I hope we don't need to go into lockdown, but I believe it should have been clear from the outset that that support that has been vital throughout this pandemic and will continue to be needed as we go forward potentially is available regardless. So I hope if my speech has done anything, it reinforces that message that we should be considering this before any announcements are made. And I made my call because I believe it's absolutely the right thing for Scottish jobs and Scottish businesses, and I'll continue to do that as leader of the Scottish Conservatives.
Scotland can actually apply for the furlough from now?
No, what I'm saying, Colin, is if there was a lockdown situation in Scotland while the current restrictions are in place in England, as is the case in Wales and Northern Ireland, that support would be available. But what I want is for the Chancellor and the government to go further and say at any point, if Scotland is required to go back into lockdown and businesses can't operate, then jobs are protected by the furlough scheme whenever that's needed in Scotland.
Thank you. I see the question, something come through from, I think, Lord Tebbit. Lord Tebbit, you there?
Unmute you, okay.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes, Lord Tebbit, welcome. Always welcome here.
Thank you. I often wonder why the Unionists in Scotland do not ask the Scottish nationalists if after separation from the UK, they want Scotland to be independent or a member of the European Union and to be governed by Brussels.
Well, Lord Tebbit, we do ask that, and indeed a speech I made in the House of Commons a few weeks ago on the Fisheries Bill, I outlined that for the SNP it was always Britain bad, Brussels good, and that is very clear that if the SNP were ever to get their way to separate Scotland from the rest of the UK, they somehow don't want to have an involvement with the Westminster government and working together. I want to see our two governments working together. They simply want to come out of the United Kingdom to go straight back into the European Union. That's why they can't answer the question on what our currency would be. That's why there are many unanswered questions with their plans for separation. And just to go back to the fishing example again, they would take us straight back into the hated common fisheries policy, which has done so much damage to Scottish and UK fishing industry. So yes, we need to continue to call that out, but it has been done in the past and it will be done going forward.
Thank you. A question now from Toby, if you're there. Name and organisation, please, if you would spell it out. Toby?
Good morning. Sorry, it took me a while to unmute. Co-founder of PSN and former director of the Association of Independent Businesses. I'd like to know from Douglas, please, how can the Conservative Party continue to call itself unionist when its espousal of Brexit is so clearly the main factor driving the growing likelihood of Scottish independence?
Well, I touched on that in my speech about, you know, I'm accepting that Brexit has driven up support for independence in some of the recent polls, and we've got to ensure that we, in the remaining period, towards the end of the transition period, and going forward, that we try to unite both sides, because there has been this winners takes all mentality with the negotiations. That's this government and previous governments, and we need more to heal the wounds of that 2016 referendum in Scotland. Clearly 62% of people voted to remain in the European Union. 1 million people voted to leave in Scotland. But the result of that referendum has to be respected in the same way the result of the 2014 referendum, I believe, has to be respected. But we have to do this in a way that brings both sides together, not alienating one side. And as I say, this individual in Edinburgh who voted to remain in the United Kingdom in 2014, but also to remain in the European Union in 2016. I can understand their feelings just now, but I also believe there is a route to get their support back again, to ensure that they can continue to support the union of the United Kingdom, 4 nations that have worked so well together for 300 years and have produced the most powerful economic and political union the world has seen.
Thank you. A question from Robert. Name and organisation, please.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Name and organisation, please.
Hi. Hi. It's Robert Cogar here, Dow Investments and Renaissance Care. Douglas, the SNP are great and very successful at selling the aspiration of an independent Scotland. How do we counter this with instilling the aspiration of a positive future for the United Kingdom, especially amongst the younger generation in Scotland? I've got two children in the late 20s, 2 in their early 30s, and it's that generation that I'm concerned about particularly.
Absolutely, and the opinion polls would suggest that there is a greater level of support for separation from the younger age groups. So we've got to tackle that. Yes, the SNP have always been good at selling a vision for separation without very many facts to back up what they believe Scotland would do, how Scotland would achieve the vision of an independent nation. So we need to do more to call that out, to look at the detail and show that despite what they say, there are clear arguments that would counter the narrative from the SNP. But you're also right, we've got to present a positive vision. You've got kids in your 20s and 30s. I've got a young son at 19 months old, and I want that positive vision for him, going to school and college, university, growing up and going into work. And we've got to do far more as a party and as the strongest voice for unionists in Scotland to deliver that positive alternative to separation. And I think sometimes we focus too much on hard facts and figures and not the emotive argument, and we need to get far better to sell that emotive argument for remaining part of this union, a union, as I say, of 4 countries who during a global pandemic can work together to save lives and livelihoods. That's the message we need to get across, that how much we benefit from being part of the Union of the United Kingdom and how much the union of the whole UK benefits from Scotland being part of that.
Thank you. A question from Muir. Name and organisation, please, if you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Muir Dickey of the Financial Times. You mentioned in your speech the frustration that the UK government continues to prepare for no deal. How important do you think it is for the Union that there is a deal with the European Union by the end of the transition period? How much of a setback would it be if we leave without one?
I think it's really important that we get a deal. The UK government are not asking for anything unique from the European Union. I think we've seen on both sides that there has been a real emphasis in just the last few weeks to up the ante to get this deal delivered, because it benefits both the UK and the European Union. But I think when people are looking at this and see that the UK government continue to prepare for no deal, as they have to, because that is the alternative to getting a deal, it does concern people. And that's why I think it's right that all the focus of the UK government is committed to delivering a deal, and how important that is for our country, for the UK, but also for our future relationship with the European Union.
Thank you. And if I just may ask one last question, Douglas, on grounds of chairman's privilege. You talk a lot about shared values. Of course, one of the key shared values across the 4 parts of the United Kingdom, which binds people who are of a unionist persuasion together, is the Crown and, of course, the armed forces. And I just wonder if you had any thoughts from your perspective, Scottish perspective, Scottish unionist perspective, specifically on the coming integrated review and the armed forces, and just what you'd like to see. Now, that because criticisms of past reviews were that they sort of hollowed out the sort of the military tradition in Scotland, and that's been criticism of both parties in years gone by. And I just wonder whether you'd care to reflect on that now.
And
what you'd like to see coming out.
And it's a very personal thing for me as well, representing Moray. You know, we have RAF Lossiemouth, huge investment going on there at the moment. £400 million of investment for the new facility for the P8s that will be opened later on this week. The Army at Kinloss Barracks. So as a constituency that I represent on a local level, I see the importance of that strong military footprint in Scotland, doing amazing work for the UK MOD and indeed our partners around the world. And I think that would clearly be under threat in an independent nation. And we have to get that message across, but it's also important that that message is delivered within government and between the respective parties, because we cannot underestimate the importance of these vital facilities being strategically located right across the country, and Scotland has a proud military record, and I want to see that strengthened going forward. We're seeing that on a local level, but there's so much more opportunity for that in Scotland as well.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming in. Thank you all for your questions. As I say, Policy Exchange is a very strong work stream in this area. Our paper, Modernising the Union, last year, 2019, rightly commanded much attention. We'll be doing a lot more in this space, but all remains for me now to thank Douglas for, as I say, doing his first address in London as leader here at Policy Exchange, and we look forward to welcoming you back, you and your colleagues and others in the broad unionist debate and in Scotland and beyond in the coming weeks and months. So thank you, Douglas. Look forward to welcoming you all back.